Let me be direct with you from the outset, because the situation unfolding in Baghdad demands directness. What we witnessed between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. local time last night was not a routine security precaution. It was not a temporary staff reduction. It was not a diplomatic adjustment. What we witnessed was the largest emergency evacuation of American diplomatic personnel from Iraq since the fall of Saigon, and I need you to understand exactly what that means. I am looking at flight tracking data that has been circulating among regional security analysts for the past 14 hours. What it shows is not a single transport aircraft. It is not a scheduled rotation. What it shows is 7 United States Air Force C-17 Globemaster aircraft making repeated flights from Baghdad International Airport to Ramstein Air Base in Germany between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. Baghdad time, 890 personnel. That is not the number the State Department is confirming publicly. That is the number confirmed by three separate Iraqi airport security officials who tracked every boarding manifest. In the next 18 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this evacuation represents the collapse of American diplomatic presence in Iraq, why the timing reveals something Washington is not yet admitting publicly, and why what happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether the United States maintains any meaningful influence in the Middle East at all. This is the Professor Marandi Report. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively suppressed by mainstream American media outlets. Let's start with the Baghdad embassy itself, because understanding its scale is essential to grasping the magnitude of what just occurred. The United States Embassy in Baghdad is not a typical diplomatic compound. It is the largest and most expensive embassy ever built by any nation in human history. The complex covers 104 acres. To put that in perspective, it is nearly 6 times larger than the United Nations compound in New York. It is larger than Vatican City. The construction cost exceeded $750 million. It was designed to be a permanent fortress, a symbol of enduring American presence in Iraq following the 2003 invasion. According to the New York Times reporting from 2008, the compound was built to house approximately 1,000 personnel with independent power generation, water treatment, and enough food storage for 6 months of siege conditions. Defense contractor KBR constructed reinforced blast walls 15 feet thick. The perimeter defenses include multiple layers of security checkpoints, vehicle barriers designed to stop truck bombs, and classified defensive systems. This was not built for evacuation. This was built to never be evacuated. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now, let's talk about what actually happened last night and why the official explanation from the State Department does not match the operational reality on the ground. Announcement number 1. The evacuation was not planned. And this one matters more than anything else, because it reveals the Biden administration was caught completely off guard by developments it should have anticipated weeks ago. At 11 p.m. Baghdad time yesterday evening, there were still scheduled meetings on the embassy calendar for today. I have confirmed this through 2 separate sources with direct access to embassy communications. The deputy chief of mission had a scheduled meeting with Iraqi foreign ministry officials at 9 a.m. this morning. That meeting was not canceled until 1:30 a.m., 90 minutes after the first evacuation flights had already departed. Cultural affairs staff had a scheduled event with Iraqi university administrators for this afternoon. These events were not preemptively canceled. They were abandoned mid-execution. According to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by Al Jazeera Arabic Service, the first indication that something extraordinary was happening came when embassy security contractors began waking non-essential staff at approximately 11:45 p.m., with instructions to pack one bag and report to the motor pool within 30 minutes. No advance notice, no scheduled departure times, no official explanation provided to the staff themselves until they were already boarding buses to the airport. The State Department's official statement released at 9 a.m. Washington time describes this as a temporary staff reduction in response to regional security concerns. That phrasing is deliberately misleading. When you evacuate 890 people with less than 6 hours' notice, that is not staff reduction. That is emergency extraction under threat of imminent danger. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the trigger was not a general threat. It was specific, credible intelligence that Iranian-backed militias were preparing a coordinated assault on the compound within the next 48 to 72 hours. This is the part multiple intelligence sources have confirmed off the record, but which no American official will state publicly. 3 Iraqi militia groups, Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, and Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, have been conducting reconnaissance operations around the embassy perimeter for the past 11 days. This is not speculation. This is documented by Iraqi security services. On April 19th, Iraqi National Intelligence Service officers detained 2 individuals attempting to photograph security checkpoints from a building overlooking the embassy's northern entrance. Both individuals were carrying communication equipment linked to Kataib Hezbollah networks. Stay with me, because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the Biden administration's public statements become impossible to reconcile with the operational decisions being made by Pentagon planners. On April 21st, the United States Central Command elevated the threat level for the Baghdad embassy from moderate to high. This designation is not public. It is an internal alert system used to authorize specific defensive measures and pre-position evacuation assets. According to Defense News reporting from 6 hours ago, CENTCOM had already moved 2 Marine fast companies, that is, fleet anti-terrorism security teams, to Kuwait 3 days before last night's evacuation. Those teams were in position and ready to deploy. That does not happen for routine threat assessments. That happens when commanders have intelligence indicating imminent attack probability exceeds 70%. The Iranian connection is undeniable and it is deliberate. All 3 militia groups taking threatening postures toward the embassy received direct financial and operational support from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. Commander Esmail Khani has made multiple public statements in the past 2 weeks, declaring that American military and diplomatic presence in Iraq is now considered a legitimate military target following the United States' support for Israeli operations in Gaza and Lebanon. Iran is not hiding its involvement. It is announcing it. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly, the evacuation represents the effective end of American diplomatic operations in Iraq. Not a pause. Not a temporary measure. The end. Here is what the State Department is not telling you. When you evacuate 890 personnel from a facility designed for 1,000, you are not leaving behind a skeleton crew. You are leaving behind security contractors who are not diplomats, local Iraqi staff who cannot perform diplomatic functions under international law, and perhaps a dozen senior officials who will themselves be evacuated within the next 7 to 10 days once the remaining administrative closure tasks are completed. The embassy is not functioning. It cannot issue visas. It cannot conduct consular services for American citizens in Iraq. It cannot perform the routine diplomatic engagement that constitutes the actual purpose of having an embassy. The Baghdad embassy is now, functionally, a defended fortress with no diplomatic mission. That is not my characterization. That is the operational reality. Think carefully about what this represents. The United States spent $750 million constructing a fortress embassy in Baghdad, specifically to demonstrate permanent commitment to Iraq following the invasion and occupation. 22 years after that invasion, after sacrifices of blood and treasure that dwarf almost any military engagement in American history, the United States has now evacuated its diplomatic presence under cover of darkness, with less than 6 hours' notice, because Iranian-backed militias made credible threats, and the United States government concluded it could not defend its own embassy. That is not a security adjustment. That is a strategic collapse, and it has consequences that extend far beyond Iraq. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering the mechanics of the evacuation while deliberately ignoring the geopolitical earthquake this represents. The official narrative from Washington is that this evacuation is a prudent security measure in response to increased regional tensions. Secretary of State Antony Blinken released a statement calling it a temporary drawdown to ensure staff safety. That framing is designed to minimize the appearance of strategic defeat, But consider what has actually occurred in the 96 hours leading up to last night's evacuation. On April 19th, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani met with Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian in Baghdad. That meeting was not on the public schedule. It was confirmed only after Iranian state media published photographs of the two officials together. According to Al Monitor's reporting, Amir Abdollahian delivered a direct message to the Iraqi government. Either Iraq takes meaningful action to expel American forces and close American diplomatic facilities, or Iranian proxies will do it for them. Iraq was given a choice between managing American withdrawal diplomatically or allowing Iran to force it militarily. 48 hours later, the Iraqi Parliament's Security and Defense Committee held a closed session. According to leaks reported by Rudaw Media Network, the committee voted 15-3 to recommend that the Prime Minister formally request the withdrawal of all American diplomatic personnel within 60 days. That vote has not been publicly announced, but it occurred. The Iraqi government is preparing to give the United States the diplomatic cover for a withdrawal it can no longer avoid militarily. And how did the United States respond? By evacuating 890 people in the middle of the night before Iraq could formally make the request. Why? Because if Iraq formally requests American withdrawal, it frames the departure as capitulation to Iraqi sovereignty. If the United States evacuates due to security threats before that formal request, it frames the departure as a prudent security decision. Washington is managing the optics of defeat, not the reality of it. Think about what this means for every other American diplomatic facility in the region. If Iranian-backed militias can credibly threaten the largest, most fortified American embassy in the world into evacuation with less than 72 hours of reconnaissance activity, what does that signal to groups threatening American facilities in Syria, in Jordan, in Lebanon? It signals that the United States will evacuate rather than defend. That is an invitation to escalate pressure everywhere American personnel remain. If you are an American diplomat stationed anywhere in the Middle East tonight, what is happening in Baghdad is not a foreign policy story. It is a personal security story. You are now wondering whether your facility will be next. You are updating your evacuation bag. You are asking whether Washington will defend your position or abandon it the moment threats become credible. That erosion of confidence among American personnel is itself strategically disabling. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to April 1975, Saigon, South Vietnam. The United States had spent 20 years and 58,000 American lives defending South Vietnam from communist forces. The United States had built a massive embassy compound in Saigon, fortified and supplied to withstand siege conditions. And on April 29, 1975, when North Vietnamese forces entered the city, the United States evacuated its embassy staff by helicopter from the roof in scenes of chaos that defined American defeat for a generation. The parallel is not exact, but it is instructive. Both evacuations occurred after decades of American military and diplomatic investment. Both were framed initially as temporary security measures. Both represented the end of American strategic presence in those nations. And both were precipitated not primarily by enemy military superiority, but by the collapse of local political will to support continued American presence. In Vietnam, the South Vietnamese government lost the will to fight once American ground forces withdrew. In Iraq today, the Iraqi government has lost the will to host American diplomatic presence under pressure from Iranian proxies. The mechanism is different, but the result is identical. The United States is forced into retreat not by conventional defeat, but by the unwillingness of host governments to bear the costs of alignment with Washington. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, limited escalation and diplomatic recovery. In this scenario, the United States treats the Baghdad evacuation as a temporary measure, redoubles security commitments to Iraq, potentially reinforces the embassy compound with additional military assets, and attempts to rebuild diplomatic operations within 60 to 90 days. This would require significant Iraqi government cooperation to suppress militia threats and renewed American willingness to accept casualties defending diplomatic facilities. The likelihood of this path succeeds is very low. The Iraqi government is not willing to confront Iranian proxies on behalf of American interests, and the Biden administration has shown no willingness to accept American casualties in Iraq with an election 6 months away. Path 2, managed withdrawal and strategic repositioning. Under this scenario, the United States formally closes or drastically reduces the Baghdad embassy, relocates core diplomatic functions to Erbil in the Kurdish region where security conditions are more favorable, and acknowledges reduced American influence in Iraqi affairs. This would be framed as realignment rather than retreat. The United States would maintain some presence but accept diminished role. This is the most likely path. It allows Washington to avoid the optics of complete defeat while accepting the reality of reduced leverage. Path 3. Complete withdrawal and regional realignment. This is the scenario where the United States not only closes the Baghdad embassy permanently, but also begins withdrawing from other contested positions across the region, Syria, Jordan, and potentially reduces its military footprint throughout the Middle East. This would represent a fundamental shift in American strategy, essentially ceding the region to Iranian and Chinese influence. This path becomes more likely if additional American facilities face successful attacks or evacuation in the next 6 months. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest. The Biden administration will not admit defeat explicitly, but the operational decisions being made right now suggest Washington is preparing for long-term absence from Iraq, not short-term security adjustment. The speed of last night's evacuation, the lack of public defense of the decision, and the absence of any clear plan for return all point toward managed withdrawal, not temporary repositioning. But here is what concerns me most. The lesson Iran and its proxies will draw from this success is not that the United States made a prudent security decision. The lesson they will draw is that sustained pressure works. If you threaten American personnel credibly enough for long enough, Washington will leave rather than fight. That lesson will now be applied to every American position across the region. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Will the United States evacuate its embassy in Beirut next if Hezbollah applies similar pressure? Will American diplomatic facilities in Damascus or Amman face the same credible threats now that Baghdad has proven the model works? And most critically, at what point does withdrawal become strategically unsustainable, where the United States loses not just individual facilities, but all meaningful influence across an entire region? Tell me in the comments what you think happens to the remaining American personnel in Baghdad in the next 30 days. Tell me if you believe the United States will attempt to return to full diplomatic operations, or if this is the beginning of complete withdrawal from Iraq. We will keep tracking every development in Baghdad, in Iraqi politics, and across Iranian proxy networks. That is what the Professor Marandi report does every single day. Subscribe now, share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what the Baghdad evacuation actually means for American power in the Middle East. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.